This is Jed Disler, and welcome again to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And there's a link to subscribe to this podcast through my Substack page if you click on the link in the episode description, and I really do hope you subscribe because you get a lot of goodies that way. We are continuing our mini-series where I'm discussing each one of the 32 piano sonatas of Beethoven. I recommend 2 recordings for each work. One historic recording, meaning an archival release or something from the 78 RPM era or mono LP era, and the second recording is a modern-day stereo or digital release. I guess modern day means from the 1960s onward, even though this era is by definition historic, if we're talking about the late 50s and early 60s, even the 70s. I guess that because the 60s and 70s stereo versions of these works were new when I was a kid, I still feel that they're new, but they are ancient history to most of you listeners. Anyway, my ground rule is that I am not permitted to repeat a pianist, meaning that we have 64 pianists and 2 pianists per sonata. We're going to talk about the Little 2-movement sonata in F major, number 22, Opus 54. It usually gets short shrift because it's buried in between the Waldstein on one side and the Appassionata on the other side. But I think this is a very interesting sonata. The first movement is marked in the tempo of a minuet. It's kind of a cross between a minuet and a rondo in terms of its form. But the second movement is a quasi-toccata, and it comes at you from out of nowhere. It's a perpetual motion kind of movement that rarely lets up, and it goes through some unpredictable harmonic detours. And then there are all those offbeat accents and phrases that are displaced against the meter, which keep the listener slightly off balance. In a way, there's a kind of experimental sensibility to this piece that, to my ears, relates back to those 2 Opus 27 sonatas that we talked about several episodes back. For my historic recording recommendation, for those of you who were disappointed that I did not recommend Solomon for the Waldstein Sonata, fear not, because he is here for Opus 54. He has a wonderful recording of it, and he delivers an interpretation that's graceful and poised, yet it's full of rhythmic vivacity and a real sense of character in both movements. His tempos are perfectly judged, too. Also, you will notice his care with dynamics, how those octave outbursts in the first movement don't get too loud too soon, as they often do. And also how Solomon's marvelous finger legato technique requires little help from the sustain pedal. The evenness and the control that he brings to the toccata-like second movement really impresses even today, when you consider how many young hotshot piano players have recorded this sonata. But Solomon really still stands out, and I love this recording. For my stereo recording choice, I've enjoyed quite a few of the recent versions out there, and they're just too many. But I keep gravitating back to Friedrich Gulda's stereo remake for the Amadeo label that came out in the late 1960s. This is the recording that's part of his second complete commercial Beethoven cycle, not to be confused with the earlier one for Decca. There was a third cycle. There was a radio cycle that Orfeo published, but I don't count that in these. I mean, it's a wonderful cycle, but I am talking about the Opus 54 in the Amadeo cycle, and this also appeared on Brilliant Classics and more recently in the Friedrich Gulda Complete Decca Recordings box that I happen to have annotated, by the way. There's a lightness to Gulda's second movement and a genuine sense of humor with subtle dabs of pedal. I would say that if Solomon is the droll classicist, then Gulda is the mischief maker and the court jester. And I like the sense of swing that Goulda brings to the first movement's theme and the kind of lift that he brings with the upbeat going into the downbeat. I've always equated this movement with that song, Oh My Darling Clementine. You know, dun 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 boom ba ba dum. I sound a little bit like Huckleberry Hound. Do you remember those cartoons with Huckleberry Hound? He always sings Oh My Darling Clementine when he's moseying along. He just goes loudy-dow-dum, loudy-dow-dum, something like that. And you know, whenever I play this piece on the piano or I hear a recording, I can't get Huckleberry Hound out of my mind any more than I can get Bugs Bunny out of my mind when I hear the overture to The Barber of Seville, because I keep thinking of the cartoon The Rabbit of Seville. You know, how do? Welcome to my shop. Let me shave your mop. Let me shave your crop. Daintily. Well, I'm not going to go through all of that. So that's my modern recommendation, Friedrich Goulda in Opus 54. I do have to mention another really good Opus 54, and this is with Alfred Brendel. And I like the recording he did for his Vox cycle. That was the cycle he did containing most of Beethoven's piano music. It said Beethoven's complete piano music, but it wasn't quite complete. And I think that Vox recording for me is the best of all the versions that he recorded of that piece. I suppose I have to give Brendel an honorable mention because he's not going to be mentioned again in this exploration of Beethoven's sonatas on record. Spoiler alert. Neither is Daniel Barenboim, by the way. Another spoiler alert. I guess at some point I'm going to have to talk about Alfred Brendel's 3 complete Beethoven cycles. Or how many cycles did Daniel Barenboim do? Let's see. We have EMI from the 1960s. We have Deutsche Grammophon from the early 80s, plus a separate video version from around that time. Then we have the video cycle from 2003 that was also out in audio format in that Beethoven for All series on Decca. And then Daniel Barenboim's Beethoven cycle that he recorded in audio for Deutsche Grammophon during lockdown. So I guess that makes 5 in all. Yikes. But I'm sidetracked as usual, so let me reiterate. For Opus 54, my recommendations are the historic one is Solomon and the modern one is Friedrich Goulda. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. And the next sonata in line on this mini-series is, you guessed it, the Appassionata, the sonata number 23 in F minor, Opus 57, one of Beethoven's most popular and frequently recorded sonatas. So which 2 will I recommend? Which 2 recordings? Do you care to venture a guess? Well, in order to find out, you will just have to join me for our next Piano Maven episode. Until then, take care, and also let me know which recording of the Appassionata that you would recommend. I bet you have one, and I'd be most curious. So until next time, stay well, and I look forward to being with you soon.